My name is Benjamin Patton, and I am the least qualified of the four people to be up at this dais this afternoon, but it's a pleasure to be here, and I'm a friend of Beit Morasha and of the Friends of the Israeli Defense Forces, and really honored to be a part of this group this afternoon. And I want to thank the FIDF and Beit Morasha and all the folks associated with putting this together for having us here. It's a wonderful panel. I think we're certainly going to raise a number of questions, and we'll see how many of them we can come up with good answers for. And the title of this panel is Ethics Under Fire: How Can We Educate for Moral Armies? And you know, when I just looked up ethics and morals and morality, I mean, in a military context for me, it essentially means a code of conduct, you know, a set of principles that guide you in these very trying situations. Now, I'm not a veteran myself. I come from a long line of veterans dating back to 1812 at WestPoint, and two grandfathers and a father that were in the American military, and my father was very involved in security assistance to the Middle East, including Israel, and during his career. And I do work extensively with veterans and dealing with post-traumatic stress rather. And but I was often reminded as a kid that I was one of those people that did not miss a meal or hear a shot fired in anger. Well, I'm next to three gentlemen who most certainly have, and they're going to be the focus of this panel. And I'll just say from my own experience, again, as a dependent, and growing up with my father, who ended up being a major general, and just recently writing a book about him, of course, I came in contact with a number of the ethical issues and learned about a number of the morally compromising situations that he would find himself in combat and often out of combat. And just a one brief example from my own history is a story he told me long ago that really stuck with me. When he was commanding a regiment in Vietnam, he was in a firefight and was fairly successful, and a number of enemy combatants were on the battlefield, some dead and some wounded, and my father sent out the medics wearing the Red Cross helmets, and they're not carrying sidearms as part of their arrangement, and went out on the battlefield to actually tend to the enemy wounded and were fired upon. And so my father, in response to that, took a rather aggressive response, and he took a barrel of diesel oil and poured it down the field and lit it on fire. And of course, that in 2020 hindsight, one might wonder whether that was the ethically and moral responsible thing to do, but according to his frame and his code of conduct, it was. So just an example of one of the many situations that a soldier might find themselves in. And now we deal with the world of IEDs and suicide bombers and predator drones. And while perhaps the ethical, moral decisions that a soldier has to make may be fewer and far between than, let's say, a civilian in New York City, the stakes clearly are much higher. So with that, let me just frame our discussion before I introduce our first speaker. And again, just the fact that this conference and this panel is happening is an astounding thing, and I'm again delighted to be here. So some of the issues that I hope will come up, and I'm sure will come up, will be addressing the practical challenges of educating soldiers about maintaining this code of conduct or a set of moral values in combat. We'll hear what's happening within the IDF and at WestPoint and in the broader American military, and of course, along with this was how realistic really is it to, in this day and age, to imbue a soldier with moral standards when you're dealing often with enemies that almost by design certainly have a very different set of moral standards or none at all, and then how could engaging in combat or being a soldier with these ethical standards translate into success on the battlefield and in terms of morale. So, and of course, whatever else, as I said, is all three of these gentlemen outrank me by a long shot. I think we'll let them talk about whatever they want once we get going. So with that, let me introduce our first speaker, which is Brigadier General Shermeister, who I've recently gotten to know in the last few days, and has a fascinating role in all of this. He, among other things, is now the director of the Education and Youth Corps of the IDF since 2007. He was previously head of the General Planning Branch of the IDF. The IDF was IDF military attaché to South Africa. commander of the Israel Air Force Command and Control Units, and holds master's degrees in national security from the University of Haifa and in public administration and government from Harvard University. And I think, just in my brief discussions with him, there's an awful lot that is quite fascinating about what he's doing, and I'm particularly struck by just the fact of the Education and Youth Corps and their manifesto, the spirit of the IDF, and other things that they're doing to specifically focus on this issue. So, General Shermeister, please come up and...
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to start with expressing my appreciation and thank you, Professor Benny Shalom and Jerry Gershon was left for an hour for inviting me here, and mainly for our strategic deep partnership we have and your support for education in the IDF. And I'll go back to the things we're doing together later on in my short brief. It will be at about 12, or Ben warned me to be in times, and I decided the strategic decision not to argue with the Patton family. And this is maybe an ethical decision, and I'll try to be in time, although it is short. I'll start with describing the educational concept, philosophy of the IDF, which is unique. And then I'll drill down to ethics and the things we do in order to strengthen the moral values of our soldiers and the commanders in the tough reality they perform, they act. A couple of days, every year, the general staff gather together to commemorate the memory of late Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin. I think the date is on Sunday or Monday, but last Monday, a couple of days before I came here, the general staff with the Lieutenant General Benny Gantz, who is the Chief of Staff, gather together, and every year we pick a different issue. This year, the subject was ethics and moral values in the IDF. And I told you that, first of all, to describe the motivation and maybe the backwind I was equipped with when I came here, and but secondly, to say that moral values and ethics is not only business of lawyers, ethic professors, education youth corps. It is part of the profession, part of the military profession, part of the way commanders must act as commanders, part of their duty. So it is an inherent part of the mission, being ethics and avoiding moral failures. Now let's see if I can manage with this excellent technology. Okay, Sean, can you save me from this embarrassing moment? It is not working, so just help me with that. Next slide. All right, great. So let me say a few words about the educational concept, philosophy in the IDF. We believe, we understand, we actually know that the IDF as a whole, the units of the IDF, the soldiers as individuals will better perform in the battlefield, will better accomplish their missions if they understand the broad aspects of the military mission. If they understand, for example, what are those broad aspects, they understand the right of a government, in a legitimate government, in a democracy, to send soldiers to the battlefield to risk their lives, or to take soldiers for a service of 3 or 2 or sometimes more years, which is a long period of time, taking almost taking their freedom, their energy, and put them in service for the country. Soldiers must deeply understand the Israeli democracy in order to be determined in the battlefield when they charge, if they are combat soldiers, or to accomplish any other mission if they are combat supportant soldiers or others. We believe that soldiers must understand the broad aspects of the military mission, understand Israeli democracy, understand and know the history of the land, of the piece of the land they are defending, whether it be Sderot, Beersheba, Hebron, or the Galilee. So we teach them democracy, we teach them the Israeli history, we teach them a history of Jewish people in order for them to understand the right of a Jewish state to exist, including, if you'd like, the dark chapter of the Holocaust. And we'll send commanders to the concentration camps in Poland in order for them to go deep in this very deep lesson we got in history. As well as we will teach them and educate them the way they should behave in the battlefield. In other words, ethics and their moral values. So first of all, or the first goal, the first purpose of education, and I think it is the only service in the world who has, okay, we want to check it, that has education youth core, is the understanding that all the things we do is supporting, first of all, the military mission and enabling the IDF accomplish its mission and defending the state of Israel. The second, I'd say, building block of the educational concept is the commitment the IDF has towards the individuals who serve. The youth that enlist, that draft the army, are at the age of 18. In any other state in the world, mostly. They go to college. Here they go to college. They develop their, they integrate in the working cycle. They develop their habits. They do things else. In Israel, they would go to the army for a long period of time and will postpone their personal plans. That creates obligation, commitment towards the individuals to bring them back home. The IDF is committed to bring the individuals back home, thank you, alive, in good shape, mentally and physically. And after they got opportunities they sometimes didn't get before. For example, we help soldiers during the duration of service to complete 12 years of education, to get a high school diploma, to study during the duration of service. To study, we provide them teachers from the army, from my corps, and they learn for their matriculation exams. They study Hebrew if they are part of minority groups who doesn't speak too well, or they are new immigrants from Ukraine, Russia, or North America. So we do a lot of civilian things as part of the commitment towards an individual that under law comes and drafts to a mandatory service. So that's, in few words, the philosophy of education in the IDF. We working. And the main purpose of education is strengthening the moral strengths of IDF soldiers and commanders. And we have two basic documents in the basis of these ideas. The first is the spirit of IDF. You can see copies on your tables in a pocket version. This is every soldier when draft or enlisted gets this pocket version. And the second one the spirit of IDF is our ethical code, and I'll get into it soon. And the second one is the identity and purpose, a document, a theory, a philosophy that describes the entire idea of education, identity of IDF, Jewish-Israeli identity, our relationship with the bereaved families, minorities, the state of Israel, Israeli democracy, and other things. By the way, and not by the way, it was developed with Beit Morasha, as we did some many other projects, and it is still one of our basic Bibles. Before we get, by the end of the lecture, I'll know how to, all right. Okay, so why do we need an ethical code? Because besides the basic idea of that every soldier, every human being has basic commands to act morally, I would emphasize, I would describe 4 reasons. First, the nature of military organization. That's a total hierarchical organization that requires uniformity, a single ethical guideline for all, for colonels, generals, and privates. And they all must follow those guidelines, and we evaluate them in the light of those guidelines, and demand them to behave and act according to those moral values, those guidelines. Then the nature of military operation missions. We live in a tough neighborhood, as you probably know, and in daily life, as well as in operational missions, we demand our soldiers on a daily basis to employ common sense and ethics. And I believe most of our commanders have read Professor Walsh's book, Just and Unjust Wars, and Professor Kasher's book about military ethics. But at the end of the day, the soldiers that are stationed in the checkpoints, that cross the border to Gaza Strip or any other place, they need something more simple, more concrete, more practical to deal with. And we couldn't invite the entire IDF to this conference to get some lessons about ethics, but and we still demand them to behave and act ethically. Then we have the no. Okay, got it. Character, background of soldiers. We have units in the IDF with soldiers that come from more than 20 countries. We were born in more than 20 countries. That creates a very heterogenic unit with different cultures that come under one unit, one organization, in one mission. And different culture codes, we need different backgrounds, we need to create a common ground and to set this guideline that will suit everyone and will let or show everyone the orders that they should follow. The soldiers are representatives of the IDF. No soldier is a representative of himself or herself. They represent the IDF, and every single soldier represents the IDF and its values, and we would like them to act as representatives of the country that send them to the mission. Let me introduce this is the spirit of IDF. This is our ethical code, a set of our moral values. This document was crystallized, was written by joint teams of IDF generals and academic professors. Professor Asa Kasher wrote the original version, and Professor Halbertal the current edition. And they are, by the way, Asa Kasher and Halbertal and many others are still engaged with moral issues in the IDF, give lectures and advice in moral dilemmas. But this is the spirit of IDF, and I'll get into more details later on. The question I want to raise, and was raised by Ben before, was can we educate and can we influence or for moral behavior? So once again, I'd like to present this quote of Professor Leibovich. I believe this quote gives a good answer, and I won't take credit for the morality of the IDF, but I believe that education, since it's shape personalities or help to shape personalities and create the infrastructure of personalities, it influence effects in building the moral infrastructure of an individual. And at the end of the day, it is the decision of a commander in a certain context to decide how to act and what to do and what will be how will he use his force in the battlefield. I'll show you a short movie, a short video about the dilemmas and some of the tools we use to develop, we developed in the IDF.
Teaching values is a cornerstone in training commanders and troops in the IDF. The values of the IDF spirit are the Army's moral identity card by which every commander and soldier is expected to act. The Education and Youth Corps develops policy and produces educational tools to help commanders assimilate these values in their units, in peacetime and in combat. Education Corps teams are spread through the IDF units, helping the commanders assimilate its values among the troops.
פיתחנו את כל עניין ההכנה המנטלית, שזה להכין את הגדודים שמגיעים לתעסוקה מבצעית לכל מה שאתה מזמן להם.
There is special emphasis on instilling the values which are more complicated to apply in the situations in which the IDF operates.
הערכים שלנו, כבוד האדם, טוהר הנשק, זה משהו שנמדד פה יומיומית, במחסום יומיומית. Special methods are developed to teach the commanders how to identify moral weak points and prevent moral failures in their units. עשו לנו סימולציות שמאוד מאוד דימו.
דיברו איתנו הרבה, הראו לנו סרטונים של דברים שקרו. מנסים כמה שפחות להיכנס איתם לתא כלים.
ולא לבוא ולהשפיל אותם, ואנחנו עוצרים אותם רק אם זה מוצדק.
The high moral standard of the IDF soldiers is an essential component in recognizing the justice of its actions, a central pillar of the IDF strength.
So that's the spirit of the IDF. I'll go over the context of the contents of the spirit of the IDF, not just an overview, not detailed. Soldiers of the IDF shall act according, this is you can find on your papers, to the values of the IDF and its commands, while abiding by the law, upholding human dignity and respecting the values of Israel as a Jewish and democratic state. The second part of the document not working. Can you push the button? Second part of the document contains the sources and the role of the spirit of IDF in the IDF. The spirit of IDF draws its inspirations from four sources. One will be the heritage of the IDF and combat heritage, combat legacy, the heritage of the state of Israel as a democratic state, the heritage of the Jewish people, and universal moral values based on values as human dignity and others. And then we have three fundamental values. three fundamental values: the defense of the state, its citizens and residents, the patriotism and loyalty to the state, and human dignity, and then 10 defined values set in alphabetical order that besides the first one, which is considered to be first among equals. The first will be the dedication to mission and the pursuit of victory, responsibility, reliability, personal example, human life, protecting human life, purity of arms, morality and welfare, professionalism, discipline, comradeship, vocation, and those are the 10 commands, 10 values we have in the IDF. Go on, please. Another one, and another one, and another one. It is not so easy to implement the values, and I'll say a few words about the challenges. We experience that since we live in a Western liberal society where material benefits and people who like to develop themselves and put themselves in the middle of their world, their idea, and we need them to charge, we need them to risk their lives. It does not always go together. So there's differences between required values in the IDF and society values. Counterterrorism and the way they act, terrorists act in the conflict, create quite a challenge, and it was talked deeply before, the distinction between non-combatant and combatant from both sides. Terrorists from the Gaza Strip launch their rockets towards civilian kindergartens and settlements or towns, and they launch their rockets from civilian areas. So making this distinguish, and it is quite a challenge for soldiers. Commanders are expected to behave as role models in the Israeli society, no forgiveness for mistakes, and that's quite a challenge. So we try not to create good reasons to be at the front page of the newspapers. And then, and it was talked before, it was discussed before by Professor Ishai Ber and others, the increasing dialogues, different alternative dialogues, such as the legal dialogues of lawyers and or the media, which is involved, or any other dialogues that are competing the ethical dialogue and sometimes changing the center of gravity. So this is our challenges, what we do with that. In short, integrating the values as part of all IDF training in all our courses, operational briefs and debriefs. Before we go to, we send soldiers to an operation, we brief them professionally as well as ethically. Every soldier that goes to an operation in everywhere or catch or get responsibility for an area, a unit defend, they go through a preparation, ethical, mental preparation to their mission, which helps a lot. And we create films, theater shows. By the way, we have theater bands that improvise and put some shows about ethical dilemmas on the stage as a platform for discussion. And we make sure, or we cannot make sure because you cannot cover everything, but we try to make sure that a soldier will meet the moral dilemmas before in real time. So he or she will have the chance to discuss, to go over some case studies, to get some guidelines, to get some briefs from the commanders before they face the dilemmas in real time, in the field. My last slide will reflect the idea of education, even if we have no immediate touchable proof that it works. And this is education. You don't see the fruit of your investments immediate. And you're not sure you'll succeed, only in years. Education is vital. It's necessary for all, for our moral strength. And this is the reason we invest a lot in education, in moral education, in our courses, in our daily life, in our discussions, in discussions between commanders, and trying to do our best, and I think the results are not so bad. Thank you.
I just want to add something that General Shermeister told me when we were speaking before, which really struck me, is that is very impressive, is that when he said that these values, these morals within the IDF are not relative. You know, it's not relative to, it's not dependent on what the values of the opponent are. I mean, you have a set of values that you live by, and I think that apply to whatever conflict and whatever combatant you're dealing with, and it seems like that's...
We demand our soldier to act according to those values, regardless of what the enemy does first, and regardless of their, which is from the other side, of course, of their own origins, beliefs. I mean, our soldiers could be Muslims, Christians, Jews, secular or religious. Everyone can hold his own beliefs, but and we don't demand him to change, or we don't influence it. Mm-hmm. But we do demand to act according to those set of values.
Yeah, no, I thought that was quite powerful. So as we get, next I'm going to introduce Colonel Glenn Goldman, who's on the faculty at WestPoint. And you know, for me, again, being up here, it helps me to understand these things by framing them in my own experience and then applying them that way. And one thing that strikes me also is that you train these things, and we're going to hear Colonel Goldman and Major Soussan talk about what's happening at WestPoint and in the Army, but you train these soldiers so that then they're in situations though where that training, where they don't have a person above them who can guide them and whose orders they can follow, so they have to make that moral decision a lot of times on their own, you know, in the battlefield. And you know, my father in his day, he gave many speeches, and he would say, when an order is brought up, you can contest it, you can question it, but once that order is approved and accepted, then you have to execute it as though you thought of it yourself. And that was something that we lived by as kids, but that works in most cases. But when you're the guy, when you're the top guy in that situation, you have to make your own judgment. And then that reminds me of another civilian example of the playwright Edward Albee, who said that, you know, the purpose of school is really to teach you how to think after you get out of school. So these are just two things in my head that help me apply this to my own life, some of these lessons, which certainly are applicable in the civilian world as well. So with that, I'd like to introduce Colonel Glenn Goldman, and who is, again, on the faculty at WestPoint. He's director of the Department of Military Instruction at the U.S. Military Academy in West Point, holds Master's of Arts degrees in National Security and Strategic Studies from the U.S. College of Naval Warfare, in public management and administration from Troy University? Troy University. And he's received numerous awards and decorations, including the Legion of Merit, Bronze Star, Defense Meritorious Service Medal, Joint Service Commendation Medal, and many others. And among other things, served in the 10th Mountain Division, which many of you all remember from World War II. Bob Dole was in that division, where he was severely wounded in Italy. And that is a unit that has seen a lot of combat since then as well. And among your deployments, I think one in Desert Storm and two in Operation Iraqi Freedom. So you've been in harm's way quite a bit, and he's going to tell us a bit about what's going on at WestPoint. And I would just say this last thing, that again, I'm the moderator, so I get to say a couple things off the cuff on my own. I know one of the things you'll talk about is what's happening in the curriculum there, and what sorts of courses are going on there in this area. There is actually, I've recently learned about the Center for Professional Ethic, which is an entire department within the faculty. It's focused on this, and from what I've heard from former superintendents at WestPoint and others, that this is at the tip of the spear in terms of focusing on this area in the American military. And lastly, I would just say in my introduction that WestPoint, again, I'm independent. My father went there, and and he too would go back periodically to WestPoint to re-immerse himself in that culture where he learned those things, including ethics and morals and guidelines of how to behave after he graduated. And when he spoke at commencement eve at WestPoint in the class of 1976, and the title of his talk was "WestPoint: The Conscience of the Army." So I think this is something that Colonel Goldman, I'm sure, believes and will speak to. So, Colonel Goldman, come on up and
thank you.
And
well, good afternoon. Thanks very much. First of all, I want to say how much I appreciate this very kind invitation to participate in a seminar on ethics. It's a very topical, issue, certainly for our military forces as we transition, as we go from these conventional wars to asymmetric warfare. And I hope to provide you a little bit of framework of what we're doing in the Army, but certainly at WestPoint, regarding the ethical development of our officer corps. And it kind of, I think, fits on the previous speakers from this morning about making ethical decisions at the senior levels. So you have to have an ethical framework at the very, very lowest level before you can, start making these strategic decisions. So as Mr. Patton mentioned, my name is Glenn Goldman. I'm actually the director of the Military Instruction Department. So I'm responsible for all the military science, military training of the cadets at WestPoint. Part of that is also the concept of professionalism and being an officer. We are not mercenaries. We're not tradesmen. Being an officer in the military is not an occupation. It is a profession. And like the medical profession or the legal profession, the profession has a set of ethics, a code of conduct. The characteristics of a profession, if you look at Samuel Huntington and some of the other theorists on a profession, is a profession that polices itself. It has educational standards. It seeks to learn and improve. But above all, the profession serves a client. And as an officer in the United States Army, my client is the American people. And I have taken an oath not to a king, a sovereign, or a president, but to a concept called the Constitution of the United States. And I am sworn to uphold that in an ethical manner. Now, obviously, the purpose of the Army is to win America's land battles. And we do that with a very precise, deliberate, moral, and justified application of violence. So what we have to do at WestPoint through a 47-month process that involves academics, physical, military, is intertwine this ethical decision-making into producing the best possible leader of character that our soldiers deserve, but more importantly, that the country deserves. So if you would allow me to just walk through a couple slides, just kind of show you what our framework is, and I find you'll, the Brigadier has already highlighted that. I was sitting here. We actually think very much alike and have the same concepts and values, go figure. Well, anyways, this is where I work. I actually work in this building right here. I have a beautiful office that overlooks the plain at WestPoint. So let me see if I can get this thing to work. I'm going to advance one slide. There we go. So there's just some of these discussion questions I'd like to cover down on, just to kind of maybe generate some discussion and get some questions going later on when I'm done. Okay. Damn, sir, I understand the trickiness you had. So you talked about 10 values or so in the IDF. These are America's Army's values. And it's a little moniker. If you look at the bottom, it's leadership. Loyalty, duty, respect, selfless service, honor, integrity, and personal courage. Now, when the Army goes through a transition, which it's always transitioning, but we're in the process of a great transition right now, the Chief of Staff of the Army a few years ago said, everything is on the table. How we fight, the weapons we buy, our tactics, everything is subject to change except this. So this is the most important core of the Army. These are our values. And much like the Brigadier mentioned, we have diverse units as well. So when you have young men and women joining the United States Army, they maybe didn't grow up with me and have a mom and a dad, or have a Boy Scout leader or a football coach. They came from different backgrounds. They might not know that it's not okay to steal. But what we tell them, these are the values, and as you go through our process, we hope you internalize these values so that you can become a fully committed member of the profession. And until you accept these and internalize them, you're not really a professional. So in the meantime, these are our rules, and this is how we act. And if you don't believe in these rules, that's okay. But when you break the rules, then it becomes a crime. So one of the things that we like to, if you look at the values, some of them actually, go against each other. And one of the easy debates that we have at WestPoint is, let's take a look at the value of loyalty, which is number one. And how does that integrate and go against integrity? So I'm loyal to my company mates, and I'll do anything I can to help them. However, one of them did something wrong, and somebody asked me about it. So what do I do now? Do I tell the truth? Yes, he did something wrong. Or do I act loyally to my comrade? And so the values are absolute, but there are still some gray areas that we have to talk through, and there's a lot of judgment that goes along with that. Again, you're dealing with the human dimension, and you have to have character that goes along with that. So I'll talk a little more about that here shortly. Okay, darn it. I'm sorry, this is very sensitive. Oh, there we go. This is the Soldier's Creed / the Warrior's Creed. Please pay attention to the red highlights, because that, I believe, is what's most important. We talk about, I'm an American soldier, I'm a warrior and a member of a team, but I live the Army values. I'm disciplined, and I'm a professional. Those are the key things the key elements of the Soldier's Creed. Now this part here, I'll always place the mission first. I will never accept defeat. I will never quit, and I will never leave a fallen comrade. Those are the 4 essential elements. But it's all based on values, being disciplined, and being a professional. Very gently, next slide. Okay, there's a delay. I figured it out. For those of you who don't know, WestPoint is about an hour north of here on the banks of the Hudson. We have about 4,500 students. We call them cadets. It's a 4-year college curriculum. Liberal arts school, engineering, military base, and this is our mission. This is what the United States Congress asks us to do. We're going to educate and inspire the Corps of Cadets to become leaders of character, to embody the motto of duty, honor, country, in order to be an officer. And the officer word implies a professional in the United States Army. So every year we graduate about 900 to 1,100 young second lieutenants that are going to go off and be junior leaders in our Army. These are the outcomes of our WestPoint Leader Development System. These are the 10 things we expect in our graduates. Now, some of them are a little tougher to measure than others. Obviously, you're going to have a 4-year Bachelor's of Science degree, and you're going to be physically fit and healthy. But we want you to be able to make sound and timely decisions under stress. And we want you to live honorably with uncompromising integrity. So when you compare the outcomes of our school to civilian colleges, there probably are some similarities, but a lot of folks sat down to come out with, what do we want a WestPoint graduate to do? What does that person look like? And these are the 10 outcomes. So after 4 years at WestPoint, this is what we expect a graduate to do. Nowhere does it say be able to solve differential equations or write philosophy papers. But that's part of it. It all goes into that. But again, it's the timely decisions under stress. Because the ambiguity of warfare, We can't replicate every scenario in Iraq or Afghanistan or wherever at WestPoint, but what we can do is teach problem solving in an ethical context. All right, let me see if I can advance this. This is a picture of a new cadet on July 2nd of this year. A new cadet came to WestPoint, checked in about 6 o'clock in the morning, and by 8 o'clock in the morning he had been issued that card because the indoctrination of ethics starts within an hour and a half of the cadet's arrival. The Cadet Honor Code is very special to WestPoint. It's very simple. A cadet will not lie, cheat, or steal, or tolerate those who do. Well, what does that mean? Well, we start the education process on day one. And I just kind of highlight that because this might be a 17, 18, maybe 19-year-old kid right off the bus. We just cut his hair, put a pair of shorts on him and a t-shirt, and gave him this card and told him to study it on the first day, before he's even sworn into the Army. It starts day one, and it remains with the cadet till he graduates. Okay, so let's talk about what develops. We talk about competence, and the competence goes back to the pillars of academics, physical, and military. That's that's pretty easy to measure. But the character piece, human spirit, moral, ethical, and social, that's a little more difficult. How do you measure that? So the moral, ethical, obviously, is the topic of the day, so I'll kind of focus on that. This is kind of a busy slide, but it's the best way that we can kind of put it in a picture. If you look at the targets, the largest one on the far left, there's a 4 above it. That's the 4th class. Those are the freshmen. The 3rd class are the yearlings, or what we call our sophomores, juniors, and these are our seniors, and then they make the rank of 2nd lieutenant. So these are the competence aspects of how we approach our education, and these are the character aspects. And the rope is supposed to symbolize the different ropes. Each of them are a separate lane, but eventually they all twist together, because what we don't want to have is somebody that is extremely academically gifted but lacking in physical and military, or has great competence because he's a smart kid, he runs fast, and he's an expert tactician, but he doesn't have the ethical piece to it or the human dimension piece. So the ropes all have to twist together in order at the end of 4 years to have a good solid rope that the country can depend on. So how do we actually do this? Well, we have, first of all, the staff and faculty is handpicked, which makes me wonder why they got me up there. But nonetheless, there's some very, very good folks up there that care deeply about this concept called leader development and ensuring that our cadets have all the academic, physical, military, and moral ethical tools to perform successfully as junior officers in the United States Army. We do this with scenarios. One of the things, I personally teach a class called MX400, which is called officership. It focuses on the military profession. And an example of a classroom exercise would be, I could call up a video of a young lieutenant that graduated from WestPoint maybe 3 years ago, was in an ethical dilemma in Afghanistan, and he's interviewed. Hi, my name's Lieutenant so-and-so. I was on patrol, and this happened, and here's what I had to go through. Stop the video, ask the class, what do you think about this? Get the discussion going, and then turn the video back on and see what the rest of the story was. Now, let me give you an example. I'm a lieutenant. I have a mission to go down and clear an IED, and there's a dead body laying in the road that's in our sector, so let's go out there. Now, the rules of engagement permit me to be very, very aggressive in protecting my force. I have a responsibility as a leader, the accomplishment of my mission and the welfare of my men. So there's 2 things I'm concerned about. So now I'm running out. My gunner, he says, sir, there's a bus and somebody is videotaping us. Now, we all know that we don't want to be videotaped because it can be used for propaganda purposes, and a lot of times our intelligence tells us when somebody videotapes us, they might actually be rehearsing an attack or are watching us to see how we do it. Confirm that. Does anybody else see the video camera? Yes, I see it. Okay, I got 2 positive identifications now. I now, as a leader, can make a decision. What am I going to do? Am I going to protect my force, which I'm authorized to do according to the rules of engagement, and give my gunner clearance to fire, say yes, take out that person shooting the video camera? Or am I going to continue to develop the scenario? This is a video that we actually use real time, actually happened, and the cadets go back and forth because there's no right answer. I mean, what I try to teach the cadets is the conscience answer. Are you going to be able to get up tomorrow morning and look in the mirror and be happy with what you see? Did you, given the right information available, make the right decision, and can you live with yourself? So, scenario A, I give the order to fire, and we end up shooting somebody that's innocent. By right, I was allowed to do that within the rules of engagement. Now, how do I feel about that? Or, I don't give the order to fire, we continue to drive, and now my front vehicle gets blown up and I have 2 casualties. How do I feel when I'm writing those letters of condolence to the parents of my soldiers? So in this particular scenario, you try to get the cadets to kind of come out, hey, what do you think? How would you approach it? And they always want more information. We all do, but sometimes you don't have time. Now in this particular scenario, what happened is the lieutenant had enough time to go up, secure that bus, secure the area in a very, very aggressive manner, stop the bus, and it turned out that the person who was videotaping was actually a young boy who was hanging out the bus with one of those big radios. So they were able to defuse the situation and, you know, causing the cadets to think, wow, and then load back up, and the bus driver, you know, hit the kid in the back of the head for putting everybody into such jeopardy, and we were able to defuse that. However, you can imagine, given where you are in the fight, and we talked about it, the previous speakers, of where you are in a fight. When I was in Iraq, we were transitioning from establishing security, which is a very, very aggressive posture, into building civil capacity. Well, there comes a time when you no longer own the ground and you have to allow the local officials to exercise their authority in order to get them to stand up. So, if we would have fired on that young boy and killed him, what would have been the second and third order effects for our operations, and how would that have affected the safety of our soldiers later on? So we literally have tens of prepared videos like this that we put the cadets through. But in my specialty, in the military training aspect, we integrate role players in our training routinely, where we have what we call COBs, civilians on the battlefield, and we purposely ask these role players to be hostile, friendly, or neutral. And we allow the cadets to operate within this scenario, and based on their behavior, the civilians on the battlefield will lean or lean away from the operation, which basically forces the cadets to realize every decision I make has consequences, good or bad. So if they make good decisions, good things happen. And if they make bad decisions, bad things happen. And they have to deal with it. And we all operate in this thing called commander's intent. So I need to understand what my boss wants me to achieve. And I can't do anything to go against that intent, because it will unhinge the whole operation. So warfare has changed. You know, the actions of a young private or a young corporal on a checkpoint can have strategic implications based on the speed of communication. That private shoots up a checkpoint, it can be on CNN tomorrow and completely change public opinion and the information operation campaign that goes along with that. And I'm sure you all can appreciate that. So what we try to do is not teach people how to fix every, you know, be prepared for every scenario, but rather to look at the problem and analyze it using all of your academic, physical, military, moral, ethical, human spirit, and social skills to come up with an analysis, develop courses of action, and then make a decision that you can live with within our ethics and with our rules of engagement. It's not easy, but it's, in my opinion, the most important thing we do at West Point. It's about character. I don't care if the lieutenant is the best shooter in the platoon or the fastest runner or the best tactician. The reason we hired him and we put him in that platoon is he must be the moral compass of that platoon. When those soldiers who have been on 3 and 4 deployments are frustrated and they've seen their buddies blown up, and they don't see us making progress, or they're discouraged, and they say, hey, we're going to get after it tonight, and we're going to go into that village, and we're going to do something, the lieutenant has to be the one that says, hey, hang on a sec, fellas, let's think about this. Is there a better way? The last point I'd like to make is this concept of an adaptive leader. I was doing some reading in preparation for my officership class, and they talked about an adaptive leader. I grew up in an army that trained and prepared to fight the Soviets. It's a different scenario. So how do you take somebody who was trained, educated, and trained and prepared for that scenario, and now put them in another scenario? You have to have the mental agility to adopt. And I believe, my opinion, that perhaps some of the missteps we've had in our officer corps and the bad decisions are maybe caused by leaders who were not adaptive. They were brought up a certain way, had a certain mindset, and were unable to adopt and change. And if you look at some of the controversy within the military of counterinsurgency doctrine versus counter-guerrilla doctrine, building civil capacity versus firmly establishing security. And as Professor Walser and his colleague mentioned this earlier, where do you put the risk, on the soldier or on the civilian? What's more important, the protection of my soldiers or the accomplishment of the mission? How can I do both and get it done correctly with the least amount of damage? So I think I'll just show you one more slide, and then that'll wrap it up for me, and I think I'll be able to maintain my time. Those are the identities of our officership. We expect our officers to be warriors, leaders of character, servants to the nation, but members of a profession. And again, a profession is very, very unique. It's not an occupation. And this is an example of a class that is a required course for all seniors at WestPoint. It's a required course. It's interdisciplinary, but it speaks specifically about being a member of a profession and a leader of character. And this, in my opinion, is the most important class we teach at WestPoint. It's a one-semester course, 40 lessons, all about officership. So this is a very, very interesting and passionate topic to me about character development, and I'll turn it over, and if anybody later on during question and answer or on sidebars, I'd be glad to at least provide you my opinion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Colonel Goldman. I'm Colonel Goldman. Let me go straight to Major Soussan. Last but not least, chaplain at the U.S. Military Academy, rabbi. WestPoint holds a master's degree from Hebrew University in Jerusalem, University of Heidelberg, and a PhD from the University of Sussex in England. Received his rabbinic ordination in Jerusalem, entered active duty in 2002, and has served as battalion chaplain in 2nd Battalion, 2nd Field Artillery at Fort Sill, battalion chaplain for Menwith Hill, Michigan. I'm sorry, Menwith Hill, Michigan, Battalion P. I'm not sure of that unit. Sorry, but it's. Forgive me. In the 54th Signal Battalion, served in Kuwait as an instructor at the U.S. Army Chaplain Center at school at Fort Jackson, South Carolina, and now teaches military ethics at the academy. And has a great big family, 4 kids, impressive. Anyway, but so let's get right to that, and I think you're going to speak a little bit about. I think what's important here is that you're speaking to this as a chaplain, as a rabbi, but as a chaplain. And I think it's interesting, and just in talking to General Shermeister and talking to you, about the different ways in which a chaplain serves and what their role is in the military, in the respective military. Certainly, my father, as a general officer, turned to his chaplains often in combat, and I think I'm interested to hear what you have to say and how that matches up with how it works in the Israeli army. So.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you.
And we have about technically about 15 or 20 minutes, but hopefully we won't spill over. But hopefully we can have time to take at least a couple questions at the end.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, I know they put the rabbi last, so he wouldn't speak too long because you know how it goes. You know, when the sermon starts, and it's hard to stop. But I appreciate the introduction, and I appreciate being invited here, such a prominent panel. And someone was wondering, what is a major doing here on a panel with a general and the colonel? They thought maybe they forgot after the major, the GEN. I said, no, I'm really a major. But I think it's important, nevertheless, to have me here, or to have someone from the Corps, from the chaplain Corps here, because we're talking about ethics, and I will come back to that. But let me quickly go through my slides. 2 years ago, exactly 2 years ago, in October 2010, the Secretary of the Army has directed the Training Doctrine Command to lead an assessment of the state of the Army profession. Colonel Goldman talked about that. To reassess, after 10 years of conflict, our profession. Now, why is that important? Why is profession so important when we talk about ethics, when we talk about being a soldier or being any professional? Because really, once you define your profession, once you define who you are, you derive from that your ethical values. So it was really important to start with the profession to make sure we all understand what we're about. So let's go to the next slide and look at the definition that the Army came up with. This is our definition here. And you can see it right there. And the point here is ethical application of land combat power. Ethical application of land combat power. That's very important. So we derive everything we do from this definition as American soldiers. And many things have been discussed already, many things have been mentioned already. But I would like to add a couple of things. And on the next slide, you can see the 5 essential characteristics of our Army profession, if you would put on the next slide. And you can see here that it describes on this slide really what the 5 characteristics are. You have expertise, honorable service, trust, esprit de corps, stewardship of the profession. And again, this all is based on the Army values that Colonel Goldman mentioned before. Everything is based on these Army values, and only from them up can we build on our profession. I'll go quickly to the next slide because I know there must be many questions. On this slide here, you see basically everything that the American soldier derives his professional ethics from. Some things here are, on the left-hand side, you can see some things are based on law. And that's the minimum standard of a compliance, really, that would include penalties for violations. And on the right half of this slide, you can see traditions of documents and other things. So universal norms, we look at accepted human rights, the golden rule, we have, even here we have interesting duty, honor, country. The WestPoint motto is part of the Army-wide framework and design for ethics. Now, of course, Army-wide, we don't have time, we don't have 4 years to train a private in these important issues like we have at WestPoint. In the Army, we have a couple of weeks maybe during basic training where we can try to instill some of these values into these soldiers who come from different various backgrounds. But this is what we base it on, basically. This is the framework for Army ethics. And there are some other documents that we could briefly, we have your just war tradition, of course, is also being discussed, the Army culture and other things. If you go to the next slide, more detailed, another document that we discuss with our soldiers in basic training, our ethic. How do we do it? Like I said, we don't have 4 years, we have only a couple of weeks. We base it on Title 10. If you look at the next slide, Title 10 of the US Code. That's very important in indoctrinating young soldiers coming into the Army, that they understand that there is a legal consequence if they behave in an unethical way. And you can see for yourself here the pertinent passages here in Title 10. So we do have the legal code on the one side, and we have the ethical code that's derived more from traditions and other traditional documents for our soldiers. The soldiers' rule I wanted to mention briefly. We here have also 10 rules, interestingly enough, just like in the IDF. If you go to the next slide here, this is directly out of an Army regulation, and you can find 10 rules here that also speak to the Army ethics and how to behave under duress and in combat. I want to mention at the end CAPE, the Center for Army Professional Ethics, located, Colonel Goldman mentioned it, located at West Point. CAPE is very important, and CAPE was really at the forefront, you also mentioned it, of ethical development. And CAPE is really the resource for all officers, for chaplains, for others to educate the force when it comes to ethical decision making and ethical dilemmas. You can see on the next slide the objectives of CAPE. Go to the last slide, please. And the Army has now developed a quarterly theme, an ethics theme that you can see here. Every quarter of the year, the Army is supposed to talk about these different topics that all have to do with ethical dilemmas, ethical behavior on the battlefield. And we're trying to do that, of course. You see the quarters here. How do we do it? And I come to my last slide. Here is a framework again, how we do this during a soldier's career. You see it to the very left on this slide. You can see here how a private, someone coming into basic training, he's already supposed, or she's already supposed to discuss these issues as much as possible. Usually it's a drill sergeant or someone who will bring up ethical dilemmas and discuss it with his unit. As a mid-grade officer or mid-grade NCO, non-commissioned officer again, and when you go through all those other professional development stages in your life, intermediate level education, and then at a strategic level at the War College and other places, the ethical dilemma will be discussed at all these places. Now, let me just say one thing that is really important, I think, for me to mention to you. The chaplaincy. The chaplaincy really sees itself as primarily the defender of religious freedom. That's the reason of being for any chaplain. So basically, the core of the U.S. Army Chaplain Corps, as defined by the Chief of Chaplains, is religious and spiritual leadership. And we assist commanders, like Colonel Goldman, we assist commanders to ensure the right of free exercise of religion. That's what we do. And the non-establishment of religion. So in other words, an atheist soldier comes to me as a chaplain as well with a concern maybe. And this is important for our discussion here, the other part of being a U.S. Army chaplain is to advise commanders on morals and ethics and the impact of religion on operations. So it's really up to the chaplain to be this moral compass. We heard about that, the moral compass of the unit. Every American unit, every American battalion, in theory, should have a chaplain. And this chaplain, what he does or she does, she will be in very close contact with the members of this unit and will always be trying to find out if there are any ethical or other moral issues with this unit and bring it to the attention of the commander. So it's really the chaplain's role to make sure that this unit is sound and healthy in understanding what the ethical rules are. And I would like to expand it and end with this. I would like to expand this discussion. We've talked a lot about conflict and we've talked a lot about armed conflict and warfare. But really, I think the American Army takes a very holistic approach, and I'm sure the Israeli Army as well. Ethics are not only important, as Colonel Goldman said, when it comes to warfare. It's something that begins very early on in a soldier's career, and ethics expands to consideration of others. We talk about ethics when we teach about sexual harassment and other things. So the chaplain has a whole range of things, of topics that he will teach in the course of a soldier's career to his unit to make sure that they understand all these concepts of ethics. So I would like to close, so we have a couple of minutes at least to speak. I would like to close with that. One more point maybe that is interesting to consider. There's a saying that it takes a whole village to raise a child, and I think it takes a whole nation as well to raise an army. The army does not live in a vacuum. The army is influenced too by what's going on in the civilian society. So it's a two-way street. We are serving our civilian society here in America, but we also are influenced by our civilian society. So there is a responsibility also from the civilian leadership to make sure that these ethics are being permanently repeated and reiterated in the public sphere, that our soldiers, when they hear those things, that they will realize that this is what they fight for, and especially, and this will be my last word, especially in a time where we saw a conflict that had a lot to do with religion, for some people more than for others. I think the chaplaincy has a very important role in the U.S. Army to make sure that this does not spill over. We have at the U.S. Army Chaplain Center and School now for a number of years always tried to have at least a Jewish chaplain at the faculty and a Muslim chaplain to teach those incoming chaplains what it is all about. And there is a hope that all of our faiths can somehow contribute to more understanding, because very often that can spill over, especially when the educational piece maybe is not as sound as it should be. And I hope that we can do what we can. But however, this is what I would like to share with you. So there are a lot of curricula that I could discuss with you at the chaplain school, how we train our incoming chaplains, what we do. One of the main pieces is how to advise our commanders on ethical issues. So with that, I leave it to you to some questions. Thank you.
So can we take a few questions in our few minutes right here in front? There's a microphone coming your way.
Thank you, all of you, for a wonderful panel. My name is Peter Reisman. I'm a member of the National Board of the FIDF and actually a recent veteran of the IDF. Didn't make it the major general, only made it to captain. But I think one component, Brigadier General Shermeister, if you respectfully allow me to supplement, I was a former officer in the Praklitud, in the Military Advocate General's Office, or Corps, if you will. According to Article 127, 144, Geneva Conventions 3 and 4, I think part of the framework that Colonel Soussan was talking about, sort of this ethical basis of a framework, part of that actually also stems from the Geneva Conventions. And what is allowed, what are the laws of war, what are you allowed to do on the battlefield, what are you allowed to do at a checkpoint, and so forth like that. And I think I just wanted to sort of supplement that there is another program in the IDF that I think people should know about. I was part of a small group that drafted, designed, and translated, actually both in Hebrew and in English, a code of conduct video, or computer program I'm sure you probably have seen before. It's a computer program about the laws of war. There's two of them. There's one on the code of conduct, there's one on the laws of war that we teach, and I was part of actually teaching this at the Officers Academy at Barachad, and we also taught it at specific units throughout the IDF. I think that's a very important component where we were able to bring also the rules of engagement, if you will, or the laws of war, what's permitted, whether it's at a checkpoint, what's permitted if you have an attack from a mosque, if you will, if from a hospital in urban areas and so forth like that. I'm sure that there are similar programs like this at WestPoint. I'm not sure if it's part of the ethics program or if it's integrated with the ethics program, the Geneva Conventions. But I do think it's important for the people here to understand that there is an additional program that actually was very well developed. I'm not sure of the status of it right now, but I know that like myself and other commanders and officers in the IDF, including reserve officers who were former members of the Military Advocate General's Corps, would go out and actually teach at the brigade level, and at the commander level, and even at the soldier level, specifically in certain areas, these ethics, if you will, that sort of form from the Geneva Conventions that we, of course, adhere to. And I don't know if you have any comments sort of on maybe the status of that program, or maybe Colonel Soussan talk about sort of the Geneva Convention role and how that plays in the ethics. But I do think it's an important note to make to the group that the IDF not only adheres to an ethical standard, but also a legal standard when it comes to international practices and international laws of war. Sorry.
Okay.
If you wanted to speak to
question there, but
the question was actually to speak maybe sort of the legal framework inside of it, which stems from the ethics, how that's integrated at the WestPoint program, and maybe if General Shermeister wants to talk about. I think the program is actually still ongoing. I know from my former officers they're still teaching at different programs throughout the IDF.
Maybe give a brief answer so we can take a couple
Sir,
more questions.
I can assure you that part of the required curriculum at WestPoint is law, and that is not just the Uniform Code of Military Justice, but it's constitutional law and also rule of land warfare, which is the Geneva Convention, and that is law. So we do adhere to that, yes.
I'll say a word. I'm familiar with this project, but I'll argue that well, the law aspect is very important, but it set the minimum standard. We don't want to disobey the law, or it set the minimum standard. When we talk about ethics, it is a little bit higher than that, because you can kill and not by the law. I mean, you can do many things, and you won't cross or you won't disobey the law, but you still might act non-ethically. So we believe we should aim to the ethical code, and it will include obeying and the law. So this is my perception for that.
Let's get a question, and I'll just say keep it brief. Yes, sir. And then we'll go to you next in the back.
Thank you.
And then we may not have much more time after that.
With all respect, I'd like to ask a sort of uncomfortable question about some of the premises. And I think in the video that was shown, and I think in both of the speeches, or these two of the three speeches, there was a comment about the ethics is derived from the justice of the mission. And so my question is, what happens if the justice of the mission is murky or uncertain or questioned, whether it may have been in Vietnam, whether it may be in policing the West Bank or other things? How does that affect what you do and how you do it and the morale of your army when the underlying ethical basis for all of the actions is fundamentally questioned?
Is that working or no? We must ensure that the mission is justified. I mean, it's a just mission. But in our rules, in the IDF, there's soldiers are allowed to disobey orders if we call it, if a black flag is over the mission or the order they got. So they are allowed by our rules, by our laws, to disobey if the mission is not, I mean, if they get ordered to kill innocent people or something like that, in the extreme cases. But all the other cases in between should be questions, and we encourage a freedom of expression. People can say, soldiers and commanders can say, can critique the justification of a mission, but once the decision was taken, they should follow it. And the area is gray. I mean, sometimes it is up to the commander in the checkpoint to decide what to do. We have to make sure that we give him the right tools to perform morally.
I could just chime in from an American perspective that the most important aspect of receiving orders is the commander's intent. And the commander has a duty to inform me as a subordinate on what his intent is, what he needs to achieve. He's going to describe the effects he wants to happen on the battlefield. I then have leeway on how to achieve that. I am duty-bound to disobey any immoral orders, but I'm also duty-bound to obey all legal orders. If I get to the point where I feel personally I cannot carry out an order, I have one option, and that is to resign my commission. I have faith in my leaders, and I have faith in my government that they are not going to ask me to do anything immoral, nor would I carry it out. And again, that is part of the ethical development, to teach people to have the strength to stand up for what is right. However, at the end of the day, if you're given a legal order and you do not follow it, you are committing a crime. I haven't been in a situation where any of my commanders have asked me to do anything illegal. There have been a couple times where I've said, hey boss, I think you told me to do this. Is that correct? He goes, no, that wasn't it. I want you to do this. Okay, I got it. We're good with that. So much like the IDF, we encourage arguing the decision and debating a better solution, but once the order is made, it's time to move out.
And I think there's a piece too for the chaplain again to add to that, that because of the absolute confidentiality that we have in the American Army, in other words, the chaplain will never reveal any information unless he's authorized by the counselee. There's a lot of times that this would be an avenue for a soldier in doubt if the decision is ethical or not, or if he should or she should follow this decision or not. So you can go to the chaplain and continue from there and get some advice, hopefully good advice, and help make that decision.
Do I have time for one more question before we call it, or do we, sir?
Yes, I have a question that's probably mostly to our service academies. Do you think that when we teach honor and morals and ethics, there is a point where we stop and we say, okay, that is where it stops? That there may be a point where you can say to yourself as an officer or as a soldier that I've tried everything, morals does not apply here anymore, or the ethics does not apply here anymore. I have to take another route. The reason why I'm asking this is because in my personal experience, there were two men, good men, with the highest standards of morals and ethics. One was a service academy graduate, the other one was a chief of naval operations. And when their morals came to question, I believe in their head, in their mind, they said, and they were taught that honor is above all. And if honor is above all, then life is not above all. And they took a very bad way out of it. They committed suicide. I think we teach this, that honor and ethics and morals are above all we do, and there is no retreat from it. Do you think that there is a point where we say, yes, there could be situations where morals are not applied? As one commander put it, he says, if you have to use the tools of the enemy to fool the devil or to beat the devil, sometimes it's moral to do so. Do you believe it is so? Thank you.
Well, I believe that I am a member of a profession, and part of the characteristics of a profession is that I am continually learning and required to learn and continue to develop. As far as, I consider honor to be something that is absolute, and I go back, this is my opinion, and how I guide my actions is, again, the next morning look in the mirror rule. Am I going to make a decision today that I'm going to be uncomfortable with tomorrow? And if I can't answer that affirmatively, then I'm not probably going to take that action. And I'm not going to allow myself to be put into a situation, nor would I put my subordinates into a situation where I am going to force them to act immorally. If they think it's immoral, maybe I haven't explained to them the intent behind the action, and I can try to convince them, hey, this is actually right. Let me explain to you what we're trying to do. But you ask a very tough and very thought-provoking question. Many say there are no absolutes in life, and it's based on your background. I happen to think there are certain absolutes, and the absolute is, what's my family going to think of me based on how I act? So that's as best that I can answer it. I hope that kind of touches on what you were looking for.
We have time for maybe one or two more. Sir, right here.
Well, unfortunately, I'm not an intelligence officer, so I cannot give you details about, I just don't know if the Syrian military service do that or others in the Middle East. Well, about the Egyptians, I believe yes. I really don't know, so I'm not basing my answer on knowledge. But I don't know what is the purpose of the question. But as I said before, We do care because we have to learn the other side of the conflict, but we demand our soldiers to act morally. This is a decision we took on ourselves, and maybe it goes back to your question, which my answer will be no. There's no point where you don't apply to your decision-making process moral aspects and moral values. So regardless of what is done in the other side of the border or among terrorist groups. That's my answer.
Let's, oh, go ahead, sorry.
Just to touch, I don't want to say anything that would be internationally controversial. I have dealt with other armies that have studied our methodologies at WestPoint and actually have traveled to other countries with the intent on talking about assisting these countries in developing a professional military ethic. Because these countries realize that maybe, not that we have everything right, but maybe there's a better way. But I'd also think that regardless of what the other side is doing, we have to maintain our own standards, and our own standards have to be the absolute highest, and we must act from the moral high ground in anything that we do.
I just want to add, you said a couple of other countries. There was just now, last month, a paper was published, a Carlisle paper by an author named Barrett, and he compares actually Israel, UK, New Zealand, and Australia, and the US in their way how to go about teaching ethics. So it's an interesting paper if you want to look that up.
So we're basically at the end, but we'll have one last question right in front here.
My question is to General Shermeister and perhaps to Colonel Goldman too. Thank you. It seemed to me, just as as someone listening today, that there may be a bit of a difference between the philosophies of the IDF and the U.S. Army, as I understood in the presentation, and please correct me. The efficaciousness of the correct thing to do came across very strongly in the Colonel's presentation. Killing that videographer could lead to a strategic situation that would be to our detriment. Also, the Colonel mentioned in response to a question that our forces would never do anything illegal. General Shermeister spoke about a higher ethical standard. I don't know if he spoke of what would happen if an Israeli soldier at a checkpoint acts in a way that CNN would record and would result in a propaganda loss. So my question is, what really is the goal? Is it to live up to the highest standard of human ethical behavior, or is it to act appropriately because that is our military mission in whatever country one is serving?
Accomplish your military mission, which is prevent suicide bomber or to cross the border or the checkpoint and get to Tel Aviv and bomb a bus. This is the mission. Soldiers must accomplish it and make sure that people in Tel Aviv live a safe life. While doing it, use your force, your authority as a commander or a soldier only at the right magnitude you need in order to accomplish the mission, right? Preserve human dignity in the checkpoint. And do whatever you want, whatever you have to make sure that terrorists won't cross it. It is not simple. It is complicated. Let me tell you in 2 minutes a short story. I took part in an arrest. I joined one of the combat brigades. They sent a platoon to arrest a terrorist in a village near Tulkarem. The intelligence said that he's armed and has a record of shooting our soldiers, and they went to take him from the house. We got intelligence that he is there. It was at about 1 o'clock in the morning, a cold night. We went there with the soldiers. They entered the house. They took out all the women and kids, and they stood out. Well, not a pleasant view. And at about a couple of hours of going up and down in the house and around, they couldn't find the terrorists. And then it came to a point. I discussed it with the brigade commander and told him, well, I think let them go to sleep, come back tomorrow, try another change the intelligence officer, maybe we'll get better intelligence. And we discussed it with the intelligence officer, and they insisted that the terrorist is there. And a few minutes before the decision to go back and to try again, they found out the terrorist on the roof and you ask yourself, you probably, questions of human dignity were raised there, and then the price you would have paid if you would let the terrorists stay there with the M16, well, the next day it would kill a few of our soldiers. So those questions are raised often, and you have to make sure to do whatever you can do in order in order to preserve human dignity, but accomplish your mission, because as Professor Kasher said and others, you have obligation towards the country that sent you to make sure you defend it. So not so easy.
Well, we're going to have to leave it there, ladies and gentlemen, but thank you to the panel for coming. I'm sure you can find them in the rest of the day to ask them other questions. Thank you very much to all of you.